Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unit 4, Day 5. Today, we're going to be talking about the presidency of Andrew Jackson. And you're going to see Andrew Jackson as president is going to be unlike anybody that we had president to that point. The first 6 presidents are going to be people who had come from a background of some sort of wealth to a degree. All the others had, very proper backgrounds, as they would have called it back then. But you're going to see Andrew Jackson's going to be someone who was born into poverty. And the way that he rises to fame is due to the War of 1812 and his leadership as a general during the War of 1812. Jackson also is going to be known as quite a character, and you'll get into and read a little bit more about his personality and how he was as a person. In fact, Andrew Jackson, such a different guy as far as politics go, that in the election of 2016, you're going to see there are a lot of comparisons that people would make between Donald Trump as a candidate and Andrew Jackson as a candidate. Not in their backgrounds, but in their personality more so. In fact, you'll see Donald Trump today has a picture of Andrew Jackson up in the Oval Office, and I think that's a nod to some of the comparisons that have been made between the two of those guys. So, Andrew Jackson, his presidency starts in 1828. Actually, if we go back to the election of 1824, which is how John Quincy Adams gets elected, you're going to see that election of 1824 is going to have all kinds of issues. And the issue that you're going to have is that no candidate would win the amount of electoral votes that they need to win the election. Andrew Jackson wins the popular vote by a pretty significant amount. The election, though, goes to the House of Representatives. Henry Clay, who was the Speaker of the House during that time, many people think that he worked out what was known as the corrupt bargain, where the House of Representatives, they choose to vote for John Quincy Adams to be the next president. Henry Clay would get a position within John Quincy Adams' presidency as a result of that. And Andrew Jackson, we hear this term today, stolen election, but Andrew Jackson, again, sees the election basically stolen from him during this time. Fast forward 4 years, the election of 1828, and you're going to see Andrew Jackson wins pretty convincingly and pretty easily. John Quincy Adams, unfortunately, was a little bit too much like his father in that not super personable, and he really didn't campaign at all against Andrew Jackson, and again, ultimately, that would lead to his defeat in the election of 1828. So this kicks off what people know as the age of the common man, because for the first time, you have a commoner becoming president of the United States. And you're going to have somebody in there as a commoner that fights for the common people. So one of the big things within Andrew Jackson's presidency is he wants to kill Henry Clay's American system. This whole system had been created, again, as a way kind of corresponding with the market revolution of a way that the government could help encourage growth within the country. But in Andrew Jackson's mind, the American system was something that benefited the wealthy in the country. He did not like that. He would get rid of anything that he could that benefited those who were in power and basically who were not like him. He wanted things to be for the common people. So in one of the documents you'll read today about his election and his actual inauguration and all the people that show up for Andrew Jackson's inauguration and what exactly that looked like. So Andrew Jackson kills off that American system. Part of the American system is the National Bank. Again, Andrew Jackson hated the National Bank, and he saw it after his re-election in 1832. He said, look, it is a mandate, it is the will of the people that they want me to kill off the National Bank, and that it would be exactly what he did. Again, he didn't like the National Bank because he saw it as something that was an advantage of the rich, so he would do that. I've just mentioned mandate, and that's something that will come out of Andrew Jackson's presidency, this whole idea of a mandate to do something. And now you're going to see that it's a very common idea in politics so for example, in the election, you're going to have a candidate win very, very big. They're going to use the term and say, hey, that is a mandate to do what I want to do as president. He's saying like the American people like my ideas, and so they've given me a mandate to do what my ideas are. So most famously recently, you could say like the election of 1984, where Ronald Reagan wins every state except for Minnesota. Say he loses one state, he could come out after that and say, hey, the American people have overwhelmingly said they like what I'm doing and they like what direction I'm taking the country. So I have a mandate to continue doing the same thing. Another thing you're going to see come out of Andrew Jackson's presidency is the idea of the spoils system, which is the idea that you can reward campaign supporters with jobs within your presidency. And that's exactly what he did. You're going to see to this point in U.S. history, generally presidents are going to try to pick people that are their friends, but that are very qualified for the job. Andrew Jackson said, I'm going to pick people that have supported me and put them in positions that I think that they should be in. So, for example, in this situation, I give Andrew Jackson my full support. He gets elected. He puts me in a position of power. And this system really wouldn't be reformed for quite a while until after the Civil War. The whole idea of trying to change that to make sure you're getting the most qualified versus just the president's friends in power there. So spoils system, and that comes from the saying, to the victor goes the spoils. So the spoils of victory in the presidency is that you get to put your friends in power. Another thing with Andrew Jackson's presidency, so you're going to see he agrees with Jefferson on this whole idea of getting rid of the national bank. A thing that he does not agree with Jefferson is the idea of nullification. So this is when you're going to start to see, again, more cracks breaking in the United States that are going to lead to the Civil War. During this time, you're going to have a massive tariff passed. And tariffs in this country really benefited the North, and they hurt the South in a big way because the South did not have the manufacturing base that the North had. So when they put in place tariffs, it was good for the North because it made people buy Northern-made goods. It was bad for the South because the South imported a lot of goods in, and ultimately it cost the South money having these tariffs being in place. So you're going to have this tariff passed, which gets called the Tariff of Abominations in the South. And you're going to have South Carolina going back to the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions and the whole idea of nullification. And South Carolina is going to say, nope, we are not going to follow this law. It is unconstitutional. And under the idea of nullification, we are going to nullify the law and refuse to obey it. Now, Andrew Jackson, you can say almost having some foresight, he says, what's going to happen if individual states are allowed to start disobeying laws? Eventually, it's going to lead to the country falling apart because states are going to be able to do whatever they want. And basically, that's going to get us to what we had under the Articles of Confederation, which, again, not enough to keep the country together and being very strong together. So Andrew Jackson says, no, you cannot do that. And we're not going to do that. South Carolina says, yes, we are going to do that. And there is nothing about it you can do. Now, this battle for Andrew Jackson even comes inside of the White House because his vice president at the time was John C. Calhoun, who was from South Carolina. And John C. Calhoun, of course, disagreed with Andrew Jackson on this whole thing. In fact, there's stories of them having public disputes within the White House in meetings there, also at social events that they had there. So much so that John C. Calhoun would actually resign as vice president and go back to being in the Senate, which is where he was before because of the disagreements that those two had. So eventually, as far as the nullification crisis goes, Andrew Jackson had enough with South Carolina and says, look, you either enforce the tariff or I'm going to send troops to the South and force you to obey the tariff and to collect it. And that's known as the force bill because they're forcing the South or forcing South Carolina into doing this. Again, in steps Henry Clay, who is known as the Great Compromiser. He steps in and is able to work out a deal for a reduced tariff, and that kept the South happy, that kept South Carolina happy, and South Carolina agrees to get rid of the whole idea of nullification of this tariff. Now, interestingly enough, when Andrew Jackson gets the force bill passed saying, hey, I can send troops into the South, South Carolina actually nullified that as well. That nullification, they kept standing. They never rescinded that nullification there. So technically, they did nullify that force bill. You can call it that. So again, another precursor of what's later going to be the Civil War and this whole idea of states standing up to the federal government and what is a president, what's within his power and ability to do. As you see with Andrew Jackson, that man never stood down to a fight, and he was definitely willing to send troops into the South to handle this issue. Another thing that you are going to see with the presidency of Andrew Jackson is his treatment of Native Americans. Now, Andrew Jackson had fought Native Americans in Florida. He had fought the Seminoles and that kind of stuff. So he didn't really think very kindly of Native Americans. And that is eventually what's going to lead to the Trail of Tears. And in fact, the Supreme Court would actually stand up to Andrew Jackson involving the Native Americans. And basically, Andrew Jackson would look at the Supreme Court and say, look, you just made a decision, but I'd love to see you actually be able to enforce that. So he stands up to the Supreme Court and doesn't agree with them, which would eventually lead to the Trail of Tears, where thousands of Native Americans would die as they are marched out of the South and moved into the Oklahoma territory during that time. And then the last of Andrew Jackson's legacy is really going to be with the Supreme Court. You have John Marshall, who is finally out of there. Again, remember, he was the old vestige of John Adams' presidency. He would finally leave the office and stop being Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and that would lead Andrew Jackson to nominate Roger B. Taney, who would take over and would be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court through the Civil War. And you're going to see Roger B. Taney as Chief Justice is going to be able to roll back a lot of these old Federalist policies, things that John Marshall had stood for and pushed for during this time. And really, in the end, you're going to see with the president, really the most lasting legacy that most presidents have is going to be their Supreme Court nominees and who they put on the Supreme Court. Remember, we talked about John Marshall, and even though there were no Federalists left in power, he was still able to push through this Federalist view of government through the Supreme Court. And he was able to do this for 30 plus years. And you're going to see Roger B. Taney is going to be able to do the same thing. He's going to be able to push a different view, more of Andrew Jackson's view of government throughout his time in office. And even today, that is the legacy of a lot of presidents, is who they nominate to the Supreme Court. In fact, when they went back and asked Ronald Reagan at the end of his presidency if there was anything that he regretted, and one of the things he said that he regretted was some of his nominees and his picks for the Supreme Court because they didn't end up falling directly in line with his political point of view. So you're going to notice there are a lot of slides today on Andrew Jackson and his presidency, and that is because he is a very, very important president to know and to understand because of his big effect and the fact that he is that first common man to take over the presidency. Little fun fact, too, is one of the great ironies in history is that today on the $20 bill, Andrew Jackson is on the $20 bill. The man who hated the National Bank is now on a note of what is essentially the Federal Reserve, which is essentially the Bank of the United States there. So that's a good irony there for you in U.S. history. So enjoy going through this. Again, there are a lot of slides. You also have DBQ documents to look at. These are going to be what you're going to be later writing your essay on in this unit. So make sure you read through and analyze those. That'll definitely help you when you get to working on your DBQ for this unit. So as always, have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, have a great day.